れが戦いの曲を表現したいというより、その二人の人生、運命を切り開いてきたっていうことを、やっぱり表現したいなっていうふうに、常に思っていて、滑りながらもその自分たちで運命を掴み取るんだっていう思いを持ちながら、二人滑っています。
Oh, I see. So why did she move next door? Officially, there's a simple answer. Stability. Better training efficiency. A more practical living setup. Completely logical. No one can really argue with it. But sometimes in life, even the correct explanation doesn't feel like the whole truth. Because in Oakville, there were plenty of other apartments. Places closer to the rink. Places with cheaper rent. Places more convenient for everyday life. Miura Riku could have chosen anywhere. Yet the place she chose was the same building where Ryuichi Kihara lived. Not the same apartment, but another room in the very same building. And today, I want us to think carefully about what that choice may have really meant. Last week and the week before, this channel talked about the kitchen stories from Oakville and the morning pickup routine. The story of how Ryuichi spent 7 years making curry for Riku. The story of how he kept driving to pick her up every morning when 17-year-old Riku still didn't even have a driver's license. And the comments flooded in. Most people said the same thing. This goes way beyond a normal senior-junior relationship. But after today's story, that feeling may become even stronger. What we're talking about today happened in 2021. The day Riku left her homestay and moved into another room inside the apartment building where Ryuichi lived. That one decision may have changed something between them forever. So today, let's carefully connect only the facts and see where they lead. First, let's organize the timeline. In August 2019, the two moved to Oakville, Ontario, Canada. At first, they lived separately. Ryuichi lived alone in an apartment. Riku, still only 17 and underage at the time, stayed with a host family. There was a physical distance between them then. Ryuichi's apartment. Riku's homestay. Every morning, he drove to pick her up because that distance existed. And that routine continued for about a year and a half. From late 2019 through 2020 and into 2021. Then in 2021, Riku made a move. She left the homestay and moved into another apartment inside the same building where Ryuichi lived. And if you stop and think about it for a moment, you realize this wasn't just moving out. Normally, when someone finishes living with a host family and starts living alone, they search based on practical conditions. Distance from work, rent, layout, convenience, everyday comfort. People compare options and choose what makes the most sense. So, why was the most logical choice for Riku the exact same building where Ryuichi already lived? The official explanation was training efficiency, easier communication, being able to discuss practice late into the night, noticing physical condition changes more quickly. And honestly, all of that is true. Every part of it makes sense. But stop for a second and really think about this. If training efficiency was the only goal, they didn't need to live in the same building. 5 minutes away would have been enough. Even another apartment on the same street would have worked perfectly fine. Yet Riku chose the same building. The very same building. What was she thinking on the day she made that decision? Did she ask Ryuichi first? Or did she decide alone and tell him afterward? And when he heard about it, what expression crossed his face? Was he surprised? Did he naturally accept it? Or maybe somewhere deep down had he already been waiting for it? Only 2 people in the world know what that conversation sounded like. And neither of them has ever spoken publicly about it. So the rest is left to our imagination. Of course, there's also the possibility that this was simply a natural decision between long-time partners. Living near someone you trust makes life overseas less stressful. Especially for Riku, who is experiencing independent life in Canada for the very first time. Choosing to stay close to someone reliable is absolutely reasonable. That explanation works perfectly. But living near someone reliable and living in another room inside the exact same building are not emotionally the same thing. If she simply wanted support, living down the street would have been enough. Yet she chose the same building. And honestly, when I first learned that detail, I couldn't move for a while. Because living in the same building means existing close enough to hear traces of the other person's life. Footsteps in the hallway. Doors opening and closing. The smell of cooking drifting from the kitchen. A distance separated by just one wall, one hallway, where the sounds of someone else simply living reach you naturally. And when two people stay that close for more than 4 years, something begins to build whether they intend it or not. Maybe it started as a practical choice between skating partners. But as human beings, living at that distance means emotions slowly and naturally pile up over time. Something invisible. Something steady. Something no one has fully found the words to name yet. Now, let's look at how life actually changed after the 2021 move. The morning pickup routine changed form. There was no longer a need for Ryuichi to drive all the way to a homestay. They lived in the same building now. All it took was going downstairs. One text message, and they could leave together. The physical distance between them suddenly became incredibly small. But the habit of starting mornings together never disappeared. They walked out of the same building, got into the same car, and headed to the same rink. The shape of the routine changed, but their mornings became even more natural, even more deeply woven into everyday life. And the kitchen changed too. If Ryuichi made curry, he only had to walk a few seconds down the hallway to deliver it. Or maybe they cooked together instead. After exhausting practices, they could stand side by side in the same kitchen. Multiple interviews suggest that the Ryuichi's curry and Riku's omurice, nights we talked about in earlier videos, truly began to become part of daily life after 2021. Before that, Riku was invited over to Ryuichi's kitchen for meals. But after moving into the same building, cooking together naturally became part of their routine. Just a few seconds walking through the hallway, that became the distance of their everyday lives. And there's another detail people shouldn't overlook. According to reports from Shukin Bunshun, their lives together weren't just about curry and omurice. The article mentioned games and Christmas too. They spent Christmas together. I want you to really sit with that sentence for a moment. Christmas is one of the few true holidays athletes get. And because they lived in the same building, all they had to do was knock on each other's door. That level of closeness became normal. And that normal continued for years. When announcer Shinichiro Azumi asked them during the daytime TV program, "I heard you two are living together in Toronto, Canada," the response from Riku immediately caught people's attention. She smiled and said, "Being together all the time has just become normal for us. And honestly, I think we need to slow down and truly understand the weight behind those words. Being together all the time became normal. That means even on exhausting days, even on frustrating days, even after arguments, even after terrible practices, they were still there together." And the word normal means something even deeper. It means they stopped consciously thinking about it. At first, maybe they noticed every moment. But eventually, it became so natural that they no longer had to think about it at all. The moment always being together becomes normal between two competitive skating partners. The relationship starts turning into something that can no longer be explained by the phrase sports partners alone. Because normal is not a word people use for something forced. It's a word reserved for relationships that quietly grow on their own over time. And the place where that normal was born was inside that apartment building. 2 separate rooms. One shared everyday life. There's another detail here that people often overlook. The article describing their relationship used the phrase, living under one roof. In Japanese culture, that phrase is overwhelmingly used to describe married couples or families. So when the reporter chose those words, there was probably intention behind them. But something even more important is this. Readers accepted that description naturally. No one questioned it. People simply thought, yeah, that sounds exactly like them.
Why?
Maybe because the reality of their lives had already become that close. Of course, technically speaking, they still lived in separate apartments. Their lives were independent. That interpretation is correct. But even with separate rooms, the fact remains that they had reached a relationship where always being together felt completely natural. And somehow the phrase under one roof perfectly fit them anyway. Whenever experts talk about why Rikoryu became so strong, they focus on technical details. Lift height, jump synchronization, program difficulty, performance quality. But if you try to explain their explosive rise after 2021 using numbers alone, something still feels missing. From struggling placements to a Grand Slam season in 2023, to another world title in 2025, and finally Olympic gold in Milan 2026. The timing of their unbelievable growth lines up almost perfectly with the year Riku moved into the same building. And that coincidence feels impossible to ignore. Riku herself once said, "Everything is built on the trust one have with Ryuichi-san." Notice something important there. She didn't talk about technique. She talked about trust. And if the period where that trust deepened the most was after 2021, after always being together became their normal life, then maybe their performances on the ice were never just about practice. Maybe perfect synchronization on the ice was created by the countless ordinary moments they shared off the ice. I keep wondering what they talked about during those nights in the building. Was it only skating? Probably not. There must have been nights where they talked about fear before competitions. Nights where they admitted exhaustion. Nights during Canada's long winters where they quietly confessed how much they missed Japan. And only a few seconds down the hallway, there was always someone there to listen. How much strength does that give a person? Then came the fall of 2022. Right before competition, Riku dislocated her shoulder. That night, the two of them were still in the same building, only seconds apart. Did Ryuichi knock on her door? Did Riku go to his? Did they run into each other in the hallway? Nobody knows. Nobody has ever spoken publicly about it. But one thing is certain. Inside that building, the two of them carried that painful night together. Later, Ryuichi would describe that moment by saying, "I thought my heart stopped." And they survived that night while living only steps away from one another. Then in the fall of 2023, Ryuichi's back injury happened. During rehab, he could no longer drive her to practice. But because they lived in the same building, they still might have crossed paths every morning. Maybe they met at the elevator. Maybe they quietly exchanged a few words in the hallway. Even after the rides disappeared, the closeness remained. And despite all of that, Rika still said, "Without Ryuichi-san, there's no meaning in pairs skating for me." Think about how heavy those words really are. They weren't just about physical distance anymore. They were talking about something much deeper. Personally, I've reread the phrase "being together all the time became normal" over and over again. Because normal is the kind of word people only understand after it disappears. Waking up every morning knowing Ryuichi was just down the hallway became part of her everyday life. And then retirement suddenly brought that life to an end. When Riku returned home to Takarazuka, how empty must those first mornings have felt? Suddenly, her words after retirement, "I just want to sleep," sound completely different now. Later, Ryuichi would say, "I honestly thought my heart stopped." And when you really think about those words, you start wondering where was he that night? When the accident happened during practice, he must have been right there. He saw Riku standing there, fighting through the pain. Then afterward, the two of them returned to the same apartment building together. Last week, we touched briefly on the drive home. But today, I want to talk about what happened after they got back. What did they do once they returned to that building? Did they quietly go back to their separate rooms? Or did one of them stay with the other for a while? Riku was still hurting. The competition was only days away. What kind of atmosphere filled that hallway that night? Personally, I don't think Ryuichi's words, "I thought my heart stopped," were about fear of losing a competition. When someone you care about gets hurt right in front of you, there's a moment where your body freezes from pure worry. That's when people say, "My heart stopped." I don't think the first thing Ryuichi felt was concern about results or rankings. I think it was something far more direct, concern for Rika herself. But there's no proof for that. No statement. No confession. Only silence. In the end, Riku overcame the injury and still competed. She stepped onto the ice carrying pain inside her body. And when the performance ended, Ryuichi embraced her. While they waited for the scores, the two stood quietly side by side. Then later that night, they returned once again to the same building. And I can't help wondering what kind of silence existed there afterward. How many seconds did Ryuichi stand in front of Rika's door after she skated through that pain? Once again, that part is left to our imagination. Then came the fall of 2023. This time, it was Ryuichi's turn to suffer. He was diagnosed with a serious back condition and had to miss multiple competitions. During rehab, the morning rides to practice suddenly disappeared. A routine that had continued every single day simply stopped overnight. For the first time in a long while, Riku had to head to the rink alone. But because they still lived in the same building, maybe they occasionally crossed paths in the hallway. Maybe they met by accident at the elevator. Even if the rides disappeared, the distance between them never truly changed. They were still only a few steps apart. And during that period, Riku said something unforgettable. "Without Ryuichi-san, pairs skating has no meaning for me." Think about the weight behind those words. Ryuichi was still there, still inside the same building, still only down the hallway, but he wasn't on the ice. And that absence created an emptiness she described as losing the meaning of pairs skating itself. This wasn't about physical distance anymore. It was about emotional presence. Whether you look at it through the story of the morning pickups or through the story of them living in the same building, the answer always leads to the same place. Ryuichi had become something in Riku's life that went beyond skating itself. Eventually, Ryuichi recovered. Rehab ended. He returned to the ice. And once again, his presence returned to the building's everyday rhythm. The morning rides returned too. I wonder what happened on that first morning when they walked out of the building together again. Did they talk? Or did they simply walk side by side in silence? Only those two know what that morning felt like. Then came March 2025. They became world champions in Boston. And during the flight home, they decided Milan would be their final Olympic journey together. Nobody knows who started that conversation. But one thing feels undeniable. The years they spent building a life inside that apartment made a conversation like that possible. Because only people who have reached a point where always being together feels normal can quietly say, "Let's finish this journey together too." That conversation on the airplane didn't begin in the sky. It began years earlier, in the hallways of Oakville. Then on February 17th, 2026, they won Olympic gold in Milan. After the performance, the entire world watched those emotional 30 seconds between them on the ice. Cameras captured every second. But honestly, I think only people who understand the life they built in Oakville can fully understand the true weight of that moment. Only people who know about the nights spent gaming together, the Christmases together, the quiet winter evenings in Canada can truly feel what those 30 seconds meant. Then on April 17th, both of them announced their retirement at the exact same time. The very next day, Ryuichi posted a single photo on social media, an open road stretching endlessly outside a car window. The caption contained only 2 words: freedom. It was later confirmed that Riku left a comment on that post. The comment itself was never revealed publicly. But even after leaving that apartment building behind, something between them clearly continued. The hallway disappeared. The doors disappeared. But the connection remained. And then came the retirement press conference on April 28th. The moment where Ryuichi broke down crying and Riku softly told him, "Please don't cry." That scene spread across the world instantly. But now, after hearing today's story, think about where those words may have come from. She had spent 4 years living only seconds away from him, hearing his footsteps, sharing ordinary days, watching his emotions up close. So when he cried in front of the world, saying, "Please don't cry," came naturally to her. That natural reaction was built over years of ordinary life together inside that same building. The Oakville apartment is no longer their home now. The hallway, the doors, the smell of food from the kitchen, those things exist only in memories. But even after retirement, 2 weeks later, they were already back on the ice together in front of 2,503 fans in Hyogo. The two people who had once made always being together their normal life had simply changed forms and continued standing side by side anyway. That day, Riku held the microphone and said, "I believe meeting my partner was fate." And honestly, if I had to choose where that fate truly began, I would point to the day in 2021 when she moved into that apartment building. The day she stood inside an empty new room and realized Ryuichi was just down the hallway. Maybe from that moment on, the story called Destiny had already quietly begun.